One of the more exciting things about Mack Brown's arrival or a return, I should say, to North Carolina has been the success of the football program sustained. This has been a fun team to watch since he's been back, and this year shouldn't be an exception. There's certain players that depart that will make this a little bit more difficult in this new ACC conference as well. So you're looking at a team that needs to adapt, but also has plenty of talent to make a run for that conference championship. We take a deep dive into the North Carolina Tar Heels and look at what should we expect in 2024. Before we do that, though, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like the video, share the video with your fellow North Carolina fans. This has been a really fun series to do so far, but it's not possible without you. So make sure you're sharing it, like, and subscribe as well. And let's dive into the North Carolina Tar Heels. When you look at what happened last year, an 8-5 season, when you look at what North Carolina had before Mack Brown came in, there were some seasons where 8-5 would have been tremendously successful, and fans would have been overjoyed with that result. Last year, it felt almost a little bit disappointing. I think that there was definitely more that was left on the table, and Mack Brown and that staff probably feel that way as well. The defense, I think, at times was kind of hard to watch, and the offense can only do so much. You can only do so much with Drake Maye. You can only do so much with the players that they had on the roster. And now you're looking at some changes, especially on the coaching staff. Chip Lindsey is back to run the offense. Geoff Collins comes in to run the defense. A lot of eyeballs are on Collins and what he can do for this defense. This is a very talented defense, but can you become more successful? Can you become more consistent than you were last year? That's probably the biggest question with this defense. And Collins comes in after being let go at Georgia Tech. That head coaching stint did not go well, but he's still a very talented coach. We'll see how he fits in with this culture, with this program. I think that's probably a big question right now, but Collins knows what he's doing. I think that he's a good play caller defensively. It's just going to be a matter of getting, like I said, getting that talent to play at a high level. Because again, North Carolina has plenty of talent to make a run in this conference. And I think that they have good depth at a lot of positions, but it's going to come down to the defense and what they can do and how do they replace one of the best quarterbacks they've had in program history. Now, the transfer portal has been an area where they've been busy because you have so many talented players. You lose quite a bit, and that's not a surprise. For a couple years now, the tight end position as well as the running back position have been deep, which means that certain guys aren't getting as many touches or any touches at all as they'd like. So you see specifically the running back position. DJ Jones, George Pettaway, and Elijah Green all depart. Mario Morales at the tight end position is gone. You also lose Andre Green Jr. at wide receiver. So the offense, thanks to its success, has produced a number of really talented players, but you've also seen some departures that maybe hurt. But I think that North Carolina, when we go into what they have at those positions that we just went into detail on, they're going to be just fine. There are not too many concerns about that. And they also brought in some talent to replace. So Morales leaves, but they bring in Jake Johnson. They also bring his brother Max to replace Drake Maye. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but those are two Texas A&M transfers that should be big time impact players for this offense. They also add a couple of impactful offensive linemen as well as a running back to fit in with what's, I wouldn't say it's a thinner group, but it's not as deep as it once was. And that's something that, you kind of anticipated if you're North Carolina. The staff definitely knew that eventually you're going to see that depth go away. And whether that's a transfer portal or people just graduating, go to the NFL, that's going to be something that happens. And they knew that coming in, but they also didn't sit around and just wait for things to happen. They made moves. They made certain guys available to come in, and you're looking at a team that has plenty of talent despite some of those losses. Now, we talked about Max Johnson. The quarterback position is probably on everyone's mind because you don't know what to expect post Drake Maye. You had Sam Howell and Drake Maye back to back. And that's really exciting. But when both of them are gone now, both of them are playing in the NFL. Now you have to figure out what does your offense look like without them because Drake Maye was extremely talented. Sam Howell was electric. You saw some of the better offenses in college football on North Carolina because of those two guys. With them gone, what can Max Johnson do? I, Here's the thing. Max, the son of Brad Johnson, former NFL quarterback. Everyone had high expectations for him when he came to LSU, and then they also expected him to take the job at Texas A&M. Obviously, neither of those things happened, and he's hit the transfer portal twice now. He's at his third school in college. When you look at his game, there's definitely talent there. I don't think there's any question about his ability to make plays. You just haven't seen him play consistently. And the numbers show that. Last year, over 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns, but 5 interceptions. This is someone who leaves something to be desired. The lefty also, now granted, he's outgrown his immature days. Where I mean, you look at the LSU game against the UCLA, throws that backwards pass while being pressured. Just some of the decision making isn't exactly exciting, but you get a new chance with North Carolina and an offense that is still extremely talented. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Well, we're going to find out what Max Johnson is made of. We're going to find out how talented he actually is because he's going to get his chance. But I think the one thing to keep in mind is that there's plenty of talent behind him. Connor Harrell had some flashes of excitement last year, so he's definitely going to be pushing for playing time. And Max Johnson has been in quarterback battles at every stop that he's had, and now he has another one. The other name to keep an eye on is Jacoby Criswell is back, former North Carolina quarterback who went to Arkansas, and now he's back in Chapel Hill. So he is someone that's going to compete for this job. And Max Johnson hold them off because it sounds like Johnson is the guy right now, but there's definitely competition behind him. That being said, if you're North Carolina staff, you almost have to be hypersensitive to this because if Johnson struggles at all and you don't put in Harrell or you don't put in Criswell, you're kind of in trouble. And maybe Harrell decides that I'm not going to sit around and be the backup. I can go play somewhere else. Or maybe you see something where you're losing the locker room if you wait too long. That's one thing to keep in mind. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that you're in a unique position with Max Johnson running the show. If he does not take a step forward, I don't want to say it's a quick trigger, a quick pull to put someone else in, but Johnson has shown so far. It's one of those. Have we already seen exactly what we're getting from Max Johnson, or is there more that we're not aware of? And so far, I think the answer is the former there, where you know what you're getting from him, and it's just a question of what is his ceiling and what is the floor. If the floor is not high enough, you might need to move on quickly. If the ceiling's too low, then you're looking at a quick quarterback change early in the year. And this is not a conference where you can afford to waste time and try to figure that out. That being said, like I mentioned before, there's plenty of talent around them. Omarion Hampton is back, one of the best running backs in college football. He is an absolute phenomenal talent, 6 foot, 220 pounds, and there's plenty of talent behind him. Maybe not as proven as some of the guys they had before. Darwin Barlow comes in from USC. Caleb Hood is back. Caleb Hood is interesting to me. He's another guy, kind of like Connor Harrell, had some flashes of excitement. You saw some big plays early in his career, just hasn't either seen the field enough or hasn't been consistent enough to stay on the field. But I'm curious how much of that was the rotation, the fact that they had so much depth that you just you didn't have enough touches to go around. That's probably one of the bigger challenges. And a lot of people would argue that it's a good problem to have because when you have so much talent, you're deep that a injury doesn't ruin what you're trying to do. It's not going to derail your season. But Caleb Hood is someone who comes in as the potential third string for North Carolina, and he is a good third string to have. So if Hampton goes down, Barlow and Hood are set to take over. So they're in really good hands, even if someone is hurt. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Hampton's going to be absolutely fun to watch. Big time playmaker who had over 1,500 yards last year, 15 touchdowns, had 222 yards receiving as well. Another scorer, caught 29 passes. So he's definitely involved in the offense. And with the new quarterback competition going on, if Johnson needs some time to acclimate to this new offense, Hampton's going to be asked to do a lot early on. Now, if they can figure out a way to move the ball down the field efficiently through the air, then Hampton will be able to settle back more into what his role was last year because you didn't have too many questions about this offense. You didn't have questions, I should say, in the skill positions. Maybe the offensive line had some questions, but the skill positions were definitely not one of them. And that shouldn't be a question again this year. The wide receivers and the tight ends are loaded once again. They're, like I said, should not be too many questions. Maybe you have some concerns about wide receiver depth, but this starting group is really good. JJ Jones had over 700 yards and 3 touchdowns. Nate McCollum almost 500 yards. And Kobe Paysor is someone who you need to keep an eye on in 2024. Now, he is coming off his third surgery in the last 6 months. So he is someone that is going through some rehab right now, trying to get back to 100%. So that's something to keep an eye on. But when he's on the field, he is a great route runner, definitely a nightmare to cover. And that's going to be give them a fun trio to watch. Now, if Paysor is not the guy, someone like Gavin Blackwell could step up in a big way. He averaged 18.4 yards per catch on just 9 catches last season. You could also see certain other players step up. Is Paul Billups ready to take that step? Is Chris Culliver ready to make some plays? There are a number of other players that could step up, but this trio, when healthy, is really fun to watch. Now, the tight end position has its own trio to keep an eye on. So you could see plenty of 12 personnel where you get those two tight ends on the field, and Johnson has a lot to work with. So Bryson Nesbitt is one of the best tight ends in college football. John Copenhaver is another one. Keep an eye on 279 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then you get Jake Johnson. I think that we've yet to see what Jake Johnson can do because we hadn't seen what he could do at Texas A&M. We didn't get to see enough. So you're hoping that you can find a little bit more from him. You could figure out what he's really good at. He has a good frame, has the talent, has the athleticism. So it'd be really fun to see if they can get Nesbitt and Copenhaver, or even Nesbitt, maybe all three of them, Johnson, Copenhaver, and Nesbitt, get them all three on the field at once. Nobody would complain about 13 personnel. It's looking a little bit different. It's going to be different, though. This is a different offense as we saw last year under Chip Lindsey. And now you have talent at certain positions that makes the personnel a little bit different as well. So you may not see as many wide receivers, though the wide receivers should be just fine despite the departures that we saw. The offensive line is probably the biggest question mark because when you look at last year, one of the things that we talked about with Drake Maye in the NFL draft was at times he just did not have enough time to throw. He didn't have a clean pocket to make certain plays. And this is a group that lost some talent and also brought in some talent from the transfer portal to help a group that needs to improve in 2024. You bring in Howard Sampson from North Texas, comes in with, not much experience, but so far he has been a staple on the offensive line through the spring, probably will be through fall camp as well. And Jonathan Adorno is an experienced player who is coming back, and Willie Lampkin is an absolute stud. Despite being undersized at 5'11, 290 pounds, that's definitely something that you don't really expect, but he understands leverage. He understands how to play at a certain level, and he has exceeded expectations, even when people are really high on him. I think there's still some doubt surrounding his game, and Lampkin so far has done nothing but exceed expectations. Has 49 starts under his belt. He's back for yet another year, and he will be the leader of this group. Bringing in Austin Blasky from Georgia is a huge get for this team. I think the staff really likes what they've seen so far from him at center. That'll be really fun to watch. And then Trayvon Green, the two tackles are massive. You have Sampson at 6'8", 325. You have Green coming in at 6'7", 340. So you have really, really big guys. Lampkin's going to look really short, really small compared to those those two, but you're looking at someone or a group, I should say, that should be an improved group, even with some of these new faces. I think that the staff likes where this group is at, and you have some decent depth behind them as well. Malik McGowan could figure into the rotation, could be in that starting lineup. Jakai Leftwich, the Georgia Tech transfer, could also figure into that. And then former five-star Zach Rice could also be in that. When we flip to the defensive line, that's where things get really fun. I think this is a group that will be very disruptive despite some of the pieces they lose. And obviously, Collins has a lot to work with when you're looking at this group. And everything kind of starts with Kamon Rucker back for yet another year for the Tar Heels. Kind of a surprise if you ask anybody within that program. They expected him to go pro. He comes back for another year after a big season. 15 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. Someone who is very good at hitting to the quarterback. Very explosive around the edge. Has a good set of pass rush moves. And we saw early on, specifically the South Carolina game, how effective, how disruptive he can be. He is someone who is very explosive, someone who knows how to use his counter moves when his first move isn't going to work. And he is someone that can be infectious on the guys around him. Someone who can be a very good player for this North Carolina defense. Geoff Collins might rely on him to get everyone else up to speed. Opposite of him is Desmond Evans, someone who everyone expects to take a big step forward this year after a solid season, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. He's 6'6", 270 pounds. So you have a solid group in terms of size for North Carolina. And when you're looking at getting to the quarterback, they'll have options outside of those two guys. Bo Atkinson is back, and he is someone who can be disruptive as well. You look at his production from last year, he showed that he can be a very disruptive player. And another guy that will contribute is Malik Hamrick, another player who has potential. He's probably the least experienced of this group, but someone who I think this coaching staff really wants to see more from in 2024. So expect to see him quite a bit. Kevin Hester Jr. comes in at the defensive tackle position, someone who is going to be, or the nose tackle rather. He is a very disruptive player when he is playing at his peak, someone who can be someone that opens things up for guys around him too. So he's not necessarily going to be the most disruptive player, but someone who can be disruptive in different ways. You can command a double team that disrupts what the opposing rushing attack wants to do. And that opens things up for a guy like Javari Ritzy, who is looking to make his mark on this defense. The defensive tackle position is a little bit more unknown, but still oozing with talent. Travis Shaw should figure into that rotation as well. Maybe a guy like Damon Brimmer is going to be in that as well. So you have options. It's not that North Carolina is lacking talent. It's just going to be, can this group be as disruptive as it was last year? Can it be what we saw from them in 2023? Because at its peak, this defensive line was very good, and they need them to be that again this year. And this staff has done a great job of bringing in talent. So the potential of this group remains as high as it's been. And if this group can be as disruptive as we anticipate, you're looking at a defense that will take steps forward from what they saw last year. Because again, this is a group that wasn't very good defensively. It wasn't very consistent, and everything starts up front, and you have the right guys in place to make that happen. The linebacker position is a interesting mix of experience and fresh faces. Power Eccles is back for yet another year. 103 tackles last year, 5.5 tackles for loss. He was a third team all ACC selection for College Football Network, someone who can be a veteran leader of this defense. Again, if this defensive line does its part, the linebackers don't need to do as much. However, this is a group that can make plays, an athletic group. They're not going to be the biggest linebackers that you'll see, but they know how to get to the football. They know how to make plays. Power Eccles has been doing that for years now, and he's got to get a guy like Amari Campbell up to speed. The staff really likes what they see from Amari Campbell. There's not really a dispute about if he's going to be the starter next to Eccles. So far, he has commanded that spot, and it's just going to come down to who are the depth pieces that can help out if one of these guys goes down. Now, Michael Short is someone who can step up in pinch, and Caleb Lavalley is another player that will, again, both of those guys inexperienced. So you're waiting to see what you get from them. But if they're able to step up and provide quality depth, you're not going to be as concerned if one of or both of the starting linebackers goes down with an injury. That's something that concerns every staff coming into a year, and Eccles and Campbell are clearly the best two options, but Ken Short and LaVallee be those guys to step up if somebody goes down or if someone needs a breather, that kind of stuff. With targeting nowadays, you know that you need players to be ready at a moment's notice because you are going to have things that don't go your way. And if you are not prepared, if you do not have the depth, you're going to be in for a world of trouble. Depth is a huge player, especially at this linebacker position. Collins knows that he has to get certain players ready to go. And the linebacker position is probably the one that has the least experience of the three levels. The secondary is kind of the opposite of that. You have players with experience, you have players with plenty of talent. It's just going to be, what does that ceiling look like? This is a group that finished 94th in yards per game through the air. So you need to see some improvement from the back end of this defense, but also part of that is getting the defensive line to get to the quarterback. Putting pressure on the opposing quarterback makes life easier for the secondary. Elijah Huzzy is back. The former FCS transfer had a huge year for North Carolina, didn't waste any time showing that he belonged at the FBS level, and he is back for another year. He is someone that everyone expects to have a big season once again, and you're going to face some really talented pass catchers in the ACC. So he's going to have his hands full after a three interception season. If he can repeat that success or even improve upon it, then they're in good hands. One of the better additions in the transfer portal within this conference was North Carolina getting NC State safety Jakeen Harris. That was kind of a surprise. I don't think a lot of people expected the former Wolfpack safety to come to North Carolina to go to a rival, but here he is, and he is a good fit for this offense, this or defense. This defense needs a veteran leader on the back end to play that safety role, and he'll join Antavius Lane, a guy who has kind of like Huzzy comes from a lower level when he comes from Georgia State and found his role pretty quickly, found a way to make an impact and showed that he is ready for that level of competition, show that he is ready to take that next step and compete against, like I said, better competition, guys that maybe challenge him a little bit more. So that's an interesting safety combination. And this is where things get really interesting. Marcus Allen is an underrated player, someone who has a lot of potential, opposite of Huzzy. Teams weren't really afraid to test the corners, and those corners succeeded quite a bit. So you're going to see two guys that's a good combination. They are ready for those challenges that await them, and it's just going to come down to, can the safeties back them up? You have plenty of talent at those positions, and there's really not a question about if they have the right guys in place. It's just going to come down to consistency and showing that on the field. One guy to keep an eye on is DeAndre Boykins. This is someone who was supposed to be a starter last year, but had a knee injury in the season opener. So someone who didn't really get to show what he could do. So in 2022, he had 67 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, one interception, seven passes defended. Probably going to play that star role for North Carolina's defense, can also play safety. So keep an eye on that, provide some depth if needed. The cornerback position is, well, everyone will pretty much have their eyes on when it comes to who is going to be the replacement for Allen or Huzzy if one of them goes down. Ty Adams is inexperienced, but has some talent that the staff really likes. And then Tyran Stewart is a JUCO transfer that could fill in, could even be part of that rotation when you need someone to step in a pinch. You know, a targeting penalty knocks one of them out, injury, that kind of stuff. The star position also, we mentioned how Boykins can go to safety if one of them goes down. You have Caleb Koss, Trey Miller, and Ty White that could also fill in at the star position. So there's plenty of talent available in this secondary. It's just going to come down to how much is that quality depth, or is it just quantity? So keep an eye on that. But I think that the inexperience could be concerning, but you have the talent. It's just a matter of how good can that backup talent be, because we know what the starters are capable of doing, but I think that you're looking at a really fun group to watch when it's all said and done. Now, when you're looking at strengths and concerns of this team, it should be pretty obvious. The strengths are that defensive line. That's the first place that we will start, just because you know exactly what you're getting from that group. We talked about Kamon Rucker. He is an absolute stud. He is going to command a lot of attention. Desmond Evans is a guy to keep an eye on as well. So this defensive line is going to be a highlight for sure of this team. The running back position, even if Hampton wasn't there, I still think that it would be a strength. You have good size with Hampton and Barlow. You also get Caleb Hood back. Like I said, there is a lot to be excited about with that position group. The tight end position is absolutely loaded. So that's probably another one to keep an eye on there. Some concerns, the linebacker position we mentioned has Power Eccles, and that outside of that, it's got talent, but is there anything that can turn that into production? Will Campbell be that guy? This staff is really high on him, but is he ready for that challenge? I believe that he is. But then outside of that, what does the depth look like behind them? What are those guys able to do if they're figuring into that rotation? What does that look like for this group? Offensive line experience, yes, this is a group that is different, and I think everybody expects them to be better. But the lack of experience outside of Willie Lampkin is pretty much going to be a concern until further notice. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that we have to keep an eye on that. Secondary depth, we just talked about too, going to be a concern until further notice. The offensive line is the X factor, because even though they appear to be a better group, this is a unit that must do better than what we saw last year. And one of the concerns for this team from last year was the fact that they struggled and Drake Maye was running for his life and trying to make plays when he didn't necessarily have much time to do so. So if that offensive line can step up, then I don't have too many concerns about this offense. We shouldn't see a step back, if any, or at all, I should say. So that leads me to believe this should be once again a good team. That being said, the schedule is where things will really come down to how good can this group be, how much depth do they have. And when you look at the over under for them is 7.5 wins, which still tells me that this is going to be a good team. I think Vegas looks at this team favorably. And the floor to me is really what stands out the most, because at worst, I think this is a 5-7 team. And that's again, this is like worst case scenario. That's like all the wheels fall off and nothing goes right. A 5-7 season wouldn't be great, but it's also higher floor than a lot of teams. The ceiling to me is 10-2. When you look at some of these games they get at Minnesota, isn't a super challenging game, but I think to me, people are sleeping on Minnesota. Not saying that they're going to beat North Carolina, but playing at Minnesota early in the season, a team that is going to have a lot of energy and is looking to bounce back after a tough year, that is a tougher game than I think a lot of people are anticipating. Charlotte should be a win. NC Central should be a win. James Madison, in theory, should be a win, but it feels like with what we've seen from North Carolina against App State over the last couple years, you just don't necessarily know. It is a home game for North Carolina, but James Madison is going to be a pretty much all new team with most of that roster departing. So that's why it should be a win for North Carolina. But that new coaching staff and the roster that's going to be overhauled from last year could present some challenges early on. But again, I don't have too many concerns about that. The other thing with that is that it's before the Duke game. A road trip to Duke is going to probably be a little bit more difficult than we anticipate. Another new coaching staff with Manny Diaz coming into town. So that's something to keep an eye on. I don't think they're going to look ahead, look past James Madison to Duke, but definitely keep an eye on that. The big game at home shouldn't be too much of a concern. Georgia Tech is much better than what a lot of people, I believe, think about this team. So that's going to be a tough game with Georgia Tech coming to town. Those two games, Pitt and Georgia Tech, are home. At Virginia and at Florida State, there shouldn't be too many concerns about the Virginia game, but also it feels like the Cavaliers have given North Carolina a little bit of trouble in the past. Florida State is a very tough team to beat. That probably will be a loss, to be completely honest. Wake Forest and Boston College present two different challenges. Wake Forest having that slower mesh offense that you have to get used to, and they're also coming off a year in which they were disappointed. So that could be something to keep an eye on there. At Boston College, playing in Boston College is always tough. It's not the atmosphere that you're probably used to. You have to play. Also, you have to play there in late November. It's going to be cold. Maybe there's some flurries. Maybe, it's definitely going to be a lot cooler than it would be if you're playing in Chapel Hill. So that's definitely a tougher game towards the end of the season. And Boston College, we don't really know what we're getting from them with Bill O'Brien and that offense and that program. So keep an eye on that one. And then NC State. NC State could have a tough beginning to their season, but this is a team that is tough to beat. North Carolina knows that they're going to be tough once again. Dave Doran does a great job of getting that program to win football games. And if they bounce back from a tough first month or so from that schedule, NC State's going to be playing with a lot of confidence in this game. So that's going to require North Carolina to play a really fundamentally sound football. So when it's all said and done, ceiling is 10-2, floor is 5-7. When you look at it realistically, probably looking at an 8-4 team. And maybe that's disappointing for this fan base. Maybe they expect more from Mack Brown. But I think that you're looking at a team that is set to, again, have a solid year. There are a couple of big questions that need to be answered here. And it just comes down to what they can do in terms of finding that depth. There's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot of talent still. Mack Brown and the staff do a great job of bringing in talent. And if they can put it all together, they can find depth and they can stay healthy on top of addressing some of those concerns and elevating those units that were problematic last year, then North Carolina is going to be just fine. And the buzz surrounding Mack Brown and his future will just come down if he's ready to retire instead of is he able to coach at a high level anymore.